everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. Our friend Wai H. Tsang is returning for his Philosopher-in-Residence series here at the Stoa. The title is The Missing Weltanschauung, Perennial Wisdom for Systems Change. And the series is 4 interlinking presentations that Wai is going to do to explain what this missing 21st century worldview or Weltanschauung looks like. And last week, we talked about how perennial wisdom returns. And then this week for session 2, about systems change and how to do it. So we're here for 90 minutes. I'm going to tag in Wai in a moment. He's going to share his screen. And if you have questions anytime, just pop them in the chat. And then during the Q&A portion, I will tag you in. If you don't want to be on YouTube, just indicate that, and I'll read your question on your behalf. So that being said, Wai, welcome back to the Stoa. You're on mute.
As fast as yes, great to be back, back in the place, back in the Stoa. Absolute pleasure. Yes, so today's talk is about system change, or really, it's really about how to do social political revolution. That's what it's about. I mean, you can put it in different ways. It's about how do these, dramatic changes in civilization in societies happen, and how they happened in the past, and how it can happen, and how what I believe is how it necessarily has to happen for the 21st century. So we're going to explain exactly what this process, what the pattern is, okay, in this talk. So we're going to, pretty much cut straight to the chase. I mean, environmental, ecological collapse, wars, rumors of wars, social injustice, kind of like growing wealth disparity, economies in kind of like disarray. So there's this kind of clamoring from all persuasions, left, right, center, for some kind of radical change. And when we examine what thinkers and commentators are saying, there's a kind of general consensus of views. To go through like a skimming stone of some of those ideas in terms of system change, they kind of converge on a certain kind of repeated set of I gotta get back my diagrams online, and basically what they're really talking about is a lack of narrative, a lack of vision, a kind of lack of worldview, weltanschaunng. Okay, so that's what these kind of commentators, thinkers are generally saying. So we're just going to skim through these diagrams. You can take screenshots. I mean, I'm just going to skim through. An idea that Douglas Murray on the right wing saying that Europe is in a state of existential tiredness, a feeling that perhaps the story or narrative has run out, a new one must be allowed to begin. Yuval Noah Harari, the same idea that old stories have collapsed, but no new story has emerged to replace them. Chris Hedges on the far left, I suppose you might say, talking about an interregnum. The old story has collapsed, but this kind of story that's going to bring about this revolution that Chris Hedges is always clamoring for doesn't seem to be appearing. And Adam Curtis, the documentary maker, the same kind of ideas, kind of loss of meaning, loss of narrative. Where is the narrative? And it's missing vision of the future. Adam Curtis, what a new story is needed. Slajov Zizek, a vision of what we're striving for. It's missing. Frederick Jameson, his pal, hardcore Marxist, a vision of the future that grips the masses. So you get the picture, a missing narrative, a missing vision, and a skimming stone over these diagrams. They're kind of like worldview. So what is a worldview? It's basically a weltanschaunng. It's basically the sum total of knowledge in a person's mind and in society. So what it is, it's basically, there's different words for it: knowledge web, maze way, cognitive mapping, new ideological framework, all really different words for the same thing. Okay, so what it is, it's this notion of Weltanschauung has no kind of English equivalent. Worldview is the best approximation. What it is, it's really the idea that contains all the ideas. Okay, so if there's a paradigm, which paradigm is changing? Legalistic, political, scientific, artistic? Well, what is changing is the entire master paradigm, and the word which captures the master paradigm is this idea of Weltanschauung. And historically, it really emerged from the German intellectual tradition, but also way back before that, really from the Renaissance and before the Renaissance. Okay, so really, it's a really powerful idea. And the roots of the idea, there's something very interesting about it, because what it implies is organic unity to knowledge, and that's what a German word implicitly kind of implies. this kind of organic unity, which isn't quite captured by the English word worldview. And it came from the kind of Renaissance and pre-Renaissance idea that the universe, society, is an organic unity. Therefore, the correct understanding of the universe and the world and society should also be an organic unity. So that's the notion of Weltanschauung. Okay, now, we're going to just go into a bit of history to really establish that this really is the answer, because it's historically has always been the critical factor behind these really powerful revolutions. Okay, to really kind of like, you know, set the kind of foundations for what I'm going to say. I mean, just to really show absolutely its worldview. Now, look, we'll go back to the revolutions of the kind of like, I guess, around the late Renaissance, early Enlightenment. Okay. Now, Europe was really kind of kept in check, and stability was maintained by an existing worldview, an existing Weltanschauung. And it included a metaphysical and cosmological assumption. Okay, I'll tell you what it is, and it really held order in place. And I need to explain to you, unless you replace this cosmological metaphysical assumption, there's no way you can have system change. There's no way you can have revolution. Let me explain what it was. It was the idea of a great chain of being. It was the idea of here is God, and here are the kind of angels and cherubim. And then below that is the king, okay? And then there's the kind of knights and the bishops, and then below that was the kind of third estate, the commoners, and then below that you had the, you know, the animals, and below that had the earthworms and beetles and black bacteria. You get a picture. It was a great chain of being, and on top of that was the king, and associated with the great chain of being was the divine right of kings to rule. Okay. So, okay, English Civil War, okay, the challenge to the king, King Charles I. Now, basically, what was on the battlefield? You had basically Cavaliers, Church of England, who believed in the divine right of kings to rule. But opposing them was basically these apocalyptic Puritans who didn't really care about your divine right of kings to rule, because they're apocalyptic Puritans. They rejected, you know, the teachings of the Church of England and the Catholic Church. And I'll also add that the kind of leadership of the parliamentary forces, Lord Thomas Fairfax was a Freemason. Many of the generals involved were actually involved in Freemasonry. Okay, we're going to explain a little bit more about Freemasonry later. Anyway, they didn't believe in the great chain of being. Okay, so basically you had this situation where you had an existing worldview that literally met on the battlefield, and basically you had an opposing worldview. Literally, it's two worldviews on the battlefield. And of course, the new worldview won. And of course, Charles I and King Louis XVI, these two deposed kings who both lost their heads, they both appealed to the great chain of being and the divine right of kings to rule. So you see, now people might think, okay, that's history, and there's no kind of analogy to the modern situation. Well, it absolutely is an analogy. Not analogy, it's basically exactly the same thing as holding society in check right now that prevents any sort of revolution or fundamental system change from happening. And I'll explain what it is later on in the talk. Let's continue. Okay, now the great philosopher Hegel, huge name in the German philosophic tradition, massive, huge philosopher Hegel, Gottfried Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He analyzed the revolutions that happened before his lifetime. He was a great admirer of Napoleon. Okay. And he drew certain conclusions, basically. He basically said that there was a secret revolution that preceded the physical manifest revolution. He called it a spiritual revolution. He called it a revolution in the zeitgeist. What he was talking about was really a revolution in a realm of ideas, because in his worldview, basically, the zeitgeist manifests as this dialectic in the head of philosophers. And that this revolution in the zeitgeist is really a revolution in ideas, essentially. Now, the young Hegel was really an admirer of Napoleon, and he believed that by applying the ideas of Immanuel Kant and the ideas of what's called Hermetic Christianity, that he basically generate the synthesis that would instigate the revolution to happen in Germany. So you got to understand that basically, yes, Hegel's work, he read some philosophic introductory texts. So he was trying to create a religion for the Volk. He was trying to, his philosophy is essentially like a religion, but it is also, it is revolutionary. It was inherently revolutionary from the outset, basically. It was a revolutionary ideology. Now, Hegel became very conservative in his old age, as people do. People become more conservative and more kind of like retrospective looking. And Hegel, went a bit funny. He thought that the Prussian monarchy in a constitutional way modified was the ideal form of political organization. Okay, that's not really appropriate for our times. So there's a movement called the kind of young Hegelians, who are kind of like followed the ideas of young Hegel, and the kind of like the so-called left Hegelians, and then the other right Hegelians. Okay, now a very prominent left Hegelian or young Hegelian is this guy called, you would have heard of this guy's name. His name is Karl Marx. Okay, so basically Karl Marx was a follower of Hegel. Okay. Now, what Karl Marx did, he essentially took the Marxist worldview, the Marxist Weltanschauung, and basically he adapted it. He made it materialist. He made it kind of like scientistic. That's what he did. But essentially, the entire Marxist edifice is essentially the Hegelian worldview with extra political economy on top. That's essentially what Marxism is. That's not kind of controversial thing to say. Now think about it. A guy working in the British Library, a single person working in the British Library writes a whole series of books. A few generations after his death, basically 1/3 of all the planet are living under regimes that call themselves Marxist. If you include all those kind of political economies that implemented social programs like the New Deal and kind of like social democracies in order to modifications of his ideas, or implemented his social programs to stop Marxist revolution, you see his influence of this person was huge. He probably influenced 2/3 of the entire planet, and that's actually a relatively short space of time. Okay, so something powerful about the Marxist Hegelian Weltanschauung. Okay, another guy who talked about Weltanschauung a lot in his personal interactions, in his speeches, in a book he wrote called Mein Kampf. Okay, you know who it is now. It's the infamous Hitler. Okay, now how did the Nazi Party begin? It's a strange story. Basically, he writes about it in Mein Kampf. Basically, he basically was sent by the German intelligence, German high command, to spy on this kind of this new political party called the German Workers' Party, and basically because they believed it was socialist grouping, but they weren't. They were rabidly nationalist and right wing. Okay. Anyway, he described these people who invited him to join the movement. He called them basically 6 or 7 poor devils. He called them. Okay, just changed my connection to my other internet link. Basically, the beginnings of the Nazi Party. They sent out invites to talks. Nobody came. He'd write, yes, and we sent out more invites, and we personally invited. No one came. And the next meeting, it was all basically the founders of the party. No one came. And he actually wrote. He wrote that we would have been pleased to have been attacked or even ridiculed, but the sad fact of the matter is, he wrote, that we were completely and totally ignored. And he goes on to write that it caused me great mental pain at that time. And it's poor little Hitler. It's a funny thing to say, isn't it? But the historic Hitler started out as a proverbial little Hitler. Yeah, the historic Hitler started out as a little. It's pathetic, but it's pathetic. But yet, 12, 13 years after that, the first few meetings, okay, this pathetic little party has taken over a major culturally advanced, technologically advanced society called Germany. Okay, and 6 or 7 years after that, they're on the verge of world domination. I know it's a disturbing thought, I know, but they could have won the war. I'm glad they didn't win the war, because I wouldn't be here today. I might have found a niche in the Japanese Empire somewhere. Okay, look, okay. How did they do it? How did they do it? Well, he tells you in minute detail. He tells you in almost tedious detail in Mein Kampf how he did it. In its Weltanschauung, paragraph after paragraph, page after page, entire chapters devoted to the subject of Weltanschauung, Weltanschauung and propaganda, Weltanschauung and the party, Weltanschauung, how it comes about, and the central importance of this idea of worldview. Okay. So really, historically, this idea of worldview, it has worked not just for the right wing, the left wing, but also for the establishment of parliamentary democracy and liberal society. So it's not, basically, it's a universal idea. So it's not just for one sort of revolution or one sort of kind of system change. It really is the means by which dramatic societal change happens historically. Okay, we're going to go into more detail to show exactly why it has to be the case that this is going to happen like this in the 21st century. Okay. Now, there's a factor in this, all the worldviews we've discussed, and it is exactly the factor we discussed in the last talk, the perennial wisdom. There is this esoteric factor to all these worldviews. Okay, it's not obvious, but we'll go into more detail in a bit. And we believe that this esoteric perennial wisdom factor, which we spent the last talk discussing, so go back to the last talk if you didn't hear it, is really the critical factor. It is this perennial wisdom. It is this esoteric religion, this hidden religion behind world religion, that has really been the driving force behind these revolutionary movements. So go back to screen share. If we go back to, okay, so now, okay, in order for the militant atheists here who are going to be tuning in, and for the secular humanists, you know, I just want to point out, okay, because you're going to be thinking, but you know, 21st century, I mean, this is not going to be relevant for any kind of social movement, you know, for system change or revolution for the 21st century, is it? Look, let me point out, even prominent atheist thinkers are basically thinking along the same lines. Prominent atheist thinkers are talking about the return of something religious and spiritual that's necessary for this critical change to happen. So Adam Curtis, in several interviews, he has said, obviously someone who knows about the power of ideas, he says, basically, in order for the great transition that is needed, basically, he says that basically, someone will find a way of fusing scientific ideas and religious ideas to produce a sort of vision of an extraordinary world that somehow has a logical power to it. And he thinks that's the answer, basically, to what he calls the utilitarian stuckness of our time. And even the most militant of militant atheists has said, basically, that we need a modern way of reinstating the mysteries of Eleusis, which is an ancient, basically, mystery rite. The central aim was to, is basically, you know, induce the state of union with God, basically. That's what the mysteries of Eleusis was about. But so Sam Harris took some 5 grams of magic mushrooms, and he thought he saw some religious epiphany. And then he says, we need to do this in order that we create an ethics and a politics and a culture generally that has its priorities straight. And even the most prominent of the new atheists, Douglas Murray, has recognized basically the modern worldview just doesn't do the sanctity of human life. And even people like Richard Dawkins are waking up to the fact that if you get rid of religion, you're going to, what replaces it is something actually not necessarily even better. He talks about the nastiness of the selfish genes, and he acknowledges that basically somehow religion has something to do with kind of like taking away the nastiness of the selfish gene. Anyway, so look, this hidden religion is basically, you know, if even the most prominent atheists and militant atheists are saying the solution has to have some kind of, you know, religious answer to it somehow. And I should also maybe take a few seconds to mention Slajov Zizek. He calls himself an atheist Hegelian. He says basically we must return to Hegel. But he has really been a part of a historic pattern where, when socialism has been in periods of transition and turmoil, there's been this repeated call to return to Hegel. We see this in writings of Lenin even. So basically, he calls himself an atheist Hegelian, but at the same time, atheists, you know, sorry, Hegel wasn't an atheist. Hegel believed he was God. It's one of the great ironies of the modern age that 2 of the most prominent atheists in the world, new atheist Douglas Murray, who calls himself atheist Christian, and Slajov Zizek, who calls himself an atheist Hegelian, 2 of the most prominent atheists in the world follow the ideas of 2 men who believe that they were God, Jesus H. Christ and Hegel. Ironic, isn't it? Anyway, it means that basically this esoteric knowledge, this esoteric kind of religion, if even militant atheists and atheists are kind of pointing towards that, the idea of a kind of 21st century esoteric revolution that's been the repeated historic pattern in the past is not so outlandish, is it? Okay, so let's just go back to where we were. Okay, the revolutions we went through. Okay, so okay, we you can take a screenshot of this. It's just, I mean, obviously, you know, your new age radical thinkers like Jamie Wheel, Jeremy Lent, Charles Eisenstein, kind of like they you know, they all kind of point towards the esoteric Eastern philosophy and stuff. So this is pretty, you know, like this is what you expect. Russell Brand, I could say Daniel Pinchbeck as well. Anyway, let's go back to where we were. Okay, so look, there's no time to go through this entire diagram. Okay, I'm just going to go through the social movements in Europe that we went through, but I can do the same analysis for all the revolutions that happened in Islam and all the revolutions that happened in, to my knowledge, 2,000 years of Chinese history. But digging deeper, I can probably go further back in time than that. So what we'll do basically, we just go through the American, French, Turkish revolutions and the English Civil War, Cromwell and the New Model Army, which we've discussed. Okay, so basically, what it is basically, as we discussed in the last talk, this perennial wisdom involves this kind of like esoteric knowledge of somehow that God is not just inside you, that somehow there's a kind of direct relationship between what is a person and what is God, that somehow there's only one soul, that somehow there's a unity between God and the person. Okay, now the thing about these revolutions, American revolutions, the Turkish and the English Civil War and French revolutions, they're really spearheaded by Freemasonry. Okay, now you got to understand, okay, Lord Thomas Fairfax led the overall parliamentary forces. The Fairfax family was one of the most prominent, was the most prominent Freemason family in all England for many generations. Okay, I'm not a Freemason. Okay, I'm not a Freemason. I'm not going to sing. I'm not singing the praises of Freemasonry today. I'm just saying historically they've done significant things. I don't know what the state of Freemasonry is today, so I'm going to quickly add that just in case people think, oh, he's Illuminati. Look, he's trying to subvert us into the Illuminati. Okay, so look, so basically the Fairfax family and then George Washington was induced into Freemasonry by the American branch of the Fairfax family. And then the French Revolution, again, spearheaded by Freemasons. Voltaire, the famous revolutionary philosopher, was initiated on his deathbed by Benjamin Franklin. So you see, there's something about Freemasonry, but also the English Civil War, apocalypticism, hastening the coming of Christ, and the New Model Army, but also in France, where Freemasonry was strong, where these, where these lodges were based, is exactly those parts of France where Protestantism was strong. Okay, so there's a relationship between this kind of challenge to the existing worldview. That's the main point, and that involved this esoteric dimension. We're going to explore the roots of Freemasonry later on when we talk about the Renaissance. Okay, now Marxism, basically, this is a fact that basically, Marxism is derived from Hegelism, but also a fact that essentially Hegelism is essentially Hermetic Christianity adapted into philosophic language. That's not my viewpoint. It's really a simple fact. You trace Hegel's life, where he got his ideas and the actual ideas themselves. Practically all his thinking, the main what's called original Hegelian thought, can be traced directly to the Corpus Hermeticum, which is a very important Hermetic text that emerged during the Renaissance. So a very good book is Glenn A. McGee's Hegel and Hermetic Tradition. So entire books have been written about it. It's not controversial. It's basically, when you actually look at the books, look at his teachings, it's basically directly derived from essentially Hermetic Christianity. So Marxism has this kind of, Hermetic core, and Hegel believed he was God, and it's basically adapted and it's made materialist, and it's basically, but even then, the four ages, I mean, it's 5 ages. I mean, you got, primitive communism, you have, slave owning societies, you have feudal serfdom, you had capitalism, and then you have, the 5th stage, but it's cyclical, just going back to another state of communism. Those 4 ages were essentially from the book of Daniel, and it was basically introduced in the German philosophic tradition by someone called Thomas Müntzer. Anyway, we're running short of time, so let's proceed so we can cover the rest of it. So it's essentially, Marxism has an esoteric dimension and this heavy apocalyptic dimension. Now the Nazi Party, basically, essentially, it came from something called the Tula Society, and the Tula Society was basically what was called, derived from this thing called the List Society. Now, Guido von List was this very prominent mystic who died in 1919. And all over the German-speaking world, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, there were List societies. The Munich branch of the List Society, after he died, renamed itself the Tula Society. And Guido von List taught these basic Gnostic ideas, the unity of God and man, and, straight from the Corpus Hermeticum. And essentially, the Tula Society was really the source of the Nazi Party. So these 6 or 7 poor devils that Hitler first met, who founded the German Workers' Party, they're all members of the Tula Society. And it's been said that the membership lists of the Tula Society read like a who's who of the early Nazi party. They're almost like the same organization. Okay. And there's a very good book called Hitler's Millennial Reich by David Reddels. He's an American professor of history, which basically explores the apocalyptic millennial dimension to the Nazi party. So do you see all these movements have this esoteric and apocalyptic dimension? We'll explain it in the talk what went wrong with Marxism and the Nazi party. It's something very fundamental went wrong with them. And this is something we have to avoid in the future when we dabble with these kind of esoteric ideas. It's actually quite important to. And if I forget to do it because of lack of time, then please do ask me Q&A, okay? Because it's really important. Anyway, so look, we're going to apply these ideas to the 21st century and how we got here in order to show that this isn't just funny, airy, fairy, new age stuff. It's really actually fundamental to understanding the world and how we got here. Okay, so look. Some of you will be familiar with this. Joseph Campbell's myth cycle. It's basically like a template of the divine, you might say, and we think there's a truth in this. It's basically like a recurring cycle that describes all these mythic quest heroes. He calls it the hero with 1,000 faces because they've repeatedly appeared on the planets. You know the story because you know the story. It's the most in terms of narrative. It's the most important, most fundamental story of them all. You know it because of Star Wars, of Dune, the Dune trilogy, of Matrix movies, Lord of the. This battle between good and evil, this kind of transcendent dimension, this kind of restoration of Camelot, etc. It's basically the story of myth. It's also the story of world prophecy. Okay, so you know the story. Let me just go through some of the stages. Okay, the myth cycle. There's a village or palace or Camelot. There's a place of tranquil, always well in this kind of, this Camelot. But then there's a kind of like disturbance to the force, and then things are not so good, and things are going slightly awry, and then kind of like the society is starting to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions, and there's kind of like a malaise, a kind of disquiet, a kind of like a dissatisfaction, and there's a call to adventure. The Knights of the Grail have to go out into this dark forest, the labyrinth, the Night Seeker, the mythic quest hero, has to somehow search for this answer to the malaise of Camelot. And this is a road of trials, and these mythic quest heroes, they develop skills and they develop talents. And there's a prize at the end of it. It is Joseph Campbell basically says that without any exception, there's always this transcendent prize. Now, it is symbolized by the Grail, it's symbolized by the princess or some kind of illumination. It's the process of apotheosis. And what we believe it is and what you can show, by reading through all these texts. And he also applies the story to the story of Muhammad, Buddha, and Jesus. So basically, it's a mystical experience. It's basically Buddha under the Bodhi tree. Muhammad's night journey is Jesus' 40 days and nights in the desert. And it's basically a mystical experience. And Joseph Campbell describes it as the experience of being the circle whose center is everywhere, whose circumference is nowhere. And he believes that this is the critical stage of the journey. And then the mythic quest hero then has the return journey. And there's a cosmic battle between the forces of light that somehow have been illuminated by the Grail and the existing powers that are trying to cling on to the corrupt Camelot. And then there's through this battle, a new stability is maintained and myth cycle repeats itself again. Okay. Now, if you're Marxist or socialist, you might want to replace Camelot for Thesis. You might want to replace the return journey, this battle between good and evil, as the battle between antithesis and thesis. And you might want to call the new Camelot and synthesis. Okay, that's optional. Okay, now we're going to apply this story to reality. Okay, and you're going to and basically where we are now is going to make complete sense because this story completely explains the Renaissance. It completely explains the Enlightenment and where we are today. Okay, and it also explains the next cycle where what we need to do to restore Camelot. Okay, look, the story of the Renaissance is this hidden factor. There's this hidden part to the story which isn't taught in schools, and it's basically it starts off with I think the main character that if you want an epicenter to where it began, it was before Florence. It was actually Riemann Lull, the kind of Catalan philosopher, also troubadour, mystic, who Dan Merker analyzes his writings. He believes that yes, Riemann Lull experienced non-duality. but he was hugely influential. Riemann Low has been called the forerunner to computer science and information science. He's been called a prototypical information scientist. And he influenced people later on like Leibniz, like Newton, like later on in Florence, Pico di Mirandola, Marsilio Ficino, hugely influential guy. You don't hear much about him because most of his writing is still in Latin. And he was really, his ideas were really suppressed by the Catholic Church. But then the hidden factor was experienced, but the hidden factor came in full force in Florence with the discovery of the Corpus Hermeticum. So the Prisca Theologia, the kind of like the hidden religion, the Prisca Theologia, the perennial wisdom, is now in this book discovered in the Bulgarian monastery. And when the Medici got it, they said to Marsilio Ficino, stop the translations of the Plato, the Aristotle, this is where the action's going on. We've got the true religion. We got basically, this is basically the pristine, uncorrupted religion of antiquity. And essentially, this is really the key book of the Renaissance, more so even than the Bible. Okay, that's a dramatic thing to say, but I think Freemasons will agree with me. I mean, it was really, really important. And essentially, it's like you can download it. Look, Corpus Hermeticum, type Corpus Hermeticum PDF, and you get a copy. Okay, it really contains its most condensed. Most intense condensation of all the mystical knowledge you can imagine in a single book. It really is like even more condensed than the Upanishads. It needs to be read, okay, to understand the Renaissance. Anyway, so basically the Renaissance was this kind of rediscovery of this knowledge. So before the Renaissance, okay, like the myth cycle, it was a dark time. It was a time of plague and war and suffering and oppression and the kind of like a search for something better. It was so dark, it was called the Dark Ages. And with the finding of this mystical knowledge, somehow there was a rebirth, there's a renaissance, and there's a kind of like real kind of like a desire to then reform all knowledge based on this mystical knowledge. And we read the Oration on the Dignity of Man, the so-called Manifesto of the Renaissance. It is a reform of all knowledge. Riemann Low wrote about this reform of all knowledge. Francis Bacon talked about it. He called it the Great Insaturation. It's a major part of the Renaissance. In the German Rosicrucian Manifesto, it was one of the 3 points of the 3-point Rosicrucian Manifesto, the reform of all knowledge. So absolutely essential. And from this reform of all knowledge, you have this Renaissance worldview, which was then communicated through the Gutenberg Press, the encyclopedia movement, this movement called Pansophia, Pansophism. And it basically spread through organizations like Freemasonry and organizations that called themselves Rosicrucian. And this thing called Bildung, this made popular by this book called The Nordic Secret. Basically, it came from essentially Freemasons and Romantic philosophers who were also happened to be all of them Freemasons. Okay, what I'm saying is basically it was a movement. It transmitted these ideas, these mystical, spiritual ideas into society. It led to, yes, it led to Bildung. It led to what's good about, I believe, not just Nordic societies, and Swiss societies and German-speaking societies, etc. And it's also led to what's good about, I think, Europe and Western civilization. That's what I believe. Okay. Now this kind of Bildung wasn't just about revolution and education, because it also led to modern science. Because the so-called midwife of modern science, the Royal Society, emerged from a group called the Invisible College, which was essentially a Freemason meeting group. You see how these ideas from the Corpus Hermeticum spread into society, and it created these ideas of a new politics, abolition of monarchy, that somehow we're all one, somehow we're all equal. There's no great chain of being anymore. Ideas of rule by reason, rule by a philosophic elect, and the idea of universal brotherhood and sisterhood, and also the idea of a technological utopia. Okay, we think like technological utopias. We think Silicon Valley, don't we? We think the Venus Project, but no. I mean, utopias which emerged during the Renaissance. It was like a cottage industry. Of course, you had Thomas More's Utopia, which was heavily influenced by Pico di Mirandola, because he's the guy who introduced Pico di Mirandola's work into the English-speaking world. And these kind of ideas of the Renaissance. And then there was, of course, Francis Bacon's New Atlantis, a completely technological utopia. It talks about submarines, flying machines, even genetic engineering. You see, way ahead of its time. And also Tommaso Campanella's City of the Sun. We can talk about Christianopolis, the Rosicrucian work. They were essentially technological utopias. But what really underpinned these utopias I believe, was essentially the ethics and the morals of these utopias, because they stress universal brotherhood, they stress equality, they stress human dignity, the sanctity of human life, and the idea of progress. Now, when you understand that modern day thinkers and philosophers, they recognize that basically John Gray recognizes the idea of progress came from ideas of prophecies, has its roots in these kind of essentially religious ideas. Douglas Murray, we spoke about earlier, recognizes that modern worldview does not support the idea of the sanctity of human life. The idea of human dignity is not supported by the modern worldview. There was an article in the Humanity Journal in 2014. The title was Human Dignity, the Last Bastion of Liberalism. It basically reviewed 4 books that tried to establish the idea of human dignity on legalistic grounds, on philosophic grounds, on kind of like logical grounds, and it all failed miserably. It's because really this idea of a human being as meat machine, human being as a collection of selfish genes does not imply human dignity. So, oh dear, something's gone wrong. And basically the Romantics, okay, continuing the Renaissance, the Romantics realized this. So there's a Romantic movement after kind of late Enlightenment. And people like William Blake realized, oh dear, that something's missing. And what was being thrown out, the baby being thrown out with the bathwater, was exactly this spiritual dimension. And then later on, as the 19th century progressed, the dark satanic mills got even darker, because William Blake, when he was writing, was barely the onset. The Industrial Revolution had barely started, okay. Then along came Charles Darwin, we could mention kind of Feuerbach, and then kind of Ernst Haeckel, and then of course Nietzsche, God is dead. But also Nietzsche warned that basically you've taken away God, you've also taken away the foundations of your morality. And this morality is by no means self-evident. He predicted this loss of meaning, this state of nihilism and final man, which I think we're living in that state right now. Okay, so basically we are seeing the fall. Camelot is losing its luster. Something's being thrown out. It's the spirituality is being thrown out. Then we have the modern period, and it's kind of like people like John Maynard Keynes realizing, oh my God, something's gone wrong with our morality. And he tried to establish a kind of like ethical capitalism on secular humanist ground. And he failed. He wrote in his later works that he basically failed. He can't do it. It doesn't work. Okay. And then he had the Second World War, rise of Nazism, Marxism, etc. And then we have the world today. And where are we today? We are basically, it's a dark time. It's a time of famine and division, wars and rumors of war. We've come full circle, you see. And basically there's this loss of meaning, and basically there's a search for the grail now. So we've come full circle. We are living in the mythic cycle. We're living in the mythic cycle. And the simple answer to the malaise of modernity is basically we have to complete the cycle. So basically it necessarily involves the search for this grail, and it necessarily involves the return of the perennial wisdom, because the perennial wisdom is basically the metaphysical cosmological assumptions of the perennial wisdom is the basis for your equality, your liberty, your universal brotherhood, universal sisterhood, your meritocracy, your human dignity, your sanctity of human life, your idea of progress. We're basically talking about not namby-pamby kind of like desires. I dream of a better world of where everyone's nice and stuff, utopia. We're talking about the basic elementary foundations of society that makes a society fair, functional, and viable. In order to create this utopia, as was said, utopias of the Renaissance were always technological. It doesn't matter we have this technological singularity and all this kind of amazing kind of 21st century technology. If we lose these values, which basically underpin the very essence of a fair functioning society, then your utopia is going to be quite dystopian. Okay. So we believe that the 21st century revolution necessarily has to involve the recovery of the Grail. So this is back to the last talk, that this time is not going to be Riemann Low having his mystical experiences and a recovery of the corpus meticum, because no one, basically you can download it, PDF, corpus meticum PDF. That's not going to change the world. But the 21st century, something quite different has happened. Basically, the mystical esoteric knowledge, as we explained in the last talk. So go back to the last talk. We won't do it again because we've basically only got 5-10 minutes now. The return this time, the perennial wisdom returns through science. But now we can, yes, reference Kabbalah, ancient mystical text, reference the corpus meticum, but we can now state the key ideas I mean all of it, of the perennial wisdom in purely scientific, rational, logical, philosophic language now for the 21st century. And that really is the key to instigating the revolution to happen in the 21st century. So look, what it means is basically by looking at in this framework, interpreting the Renaissance in this framework, it gives us a roadmap for understanding what's to come. Okay, look, these diagrams look almost identical. Look, this is basically the story of the Renaissance, and this is the next cycle. It's almost like a complete replay, a time of dark malaise, wars and rumors of wars, search for a grail, but the hidden factor now returns through science. It's literally an apocalypse, the unveiling of the hidden thing. Now, what is the 21st century worldview? We have a roadmap. It's basically the reform of all knowledge, given this new scientific understanding. Of course, it's the reform of religious knowledge, it's the reform of world history, but it's also the reform of ethical, moral, political philosophy, by reinstating those very foundations which gave rise to these ideas of progress, equality, liberty, human dignity, etc. for the 21st century, absolutely essential. And of course, now communicating the knowledge, instead of the Gutenberg press, we have the internet. And the new pansophism is basically, you know, it is a new movement that all things, again, should be taught to all people, the kind of reinstating of the power of knowledge and the power of ideas. And the new Bildung, I mean, the authors of Nordic Secret proposed a kind of new Bildung, but it lacked the original kind of the shaping oneself in the image of God aspect. If you can actually return the mystical, the spiritual to the new Bildung, I think you have a more complete and authentic Bildung. So this really is the secret revolution in the zeitgeist. It's basically the recovery of the hidden knowledge in purely scientific terms. And it's basically this worldview that's a reform of all knowledge based on this reinstating. It's almost like a complete replay of the Renaissance. And then it leads to this political revolution to realize the utopian vision and this abolition now of tech feudalism ruled by a billionaire class. And return of the progress ideas of progress, equality, fraternity, universal brotherhood, and sisterhood, and meritocracy. It is a new 21st century Concordia Mundi, a universal brotherhood, sisterhood. And in terms of the technological singularity, look, there was always an ethics around the technology from the Renaissance, basically. So you know, some contemporary thinkers say that basically we need an ethics to somehow rein in this kind of exponential technology. That somehow the technological world lacks an ethics, that there's never been ethics for something this technological. I say to you, basically, there was always an ethics to technology. There's always, except they didn't call it technology back then in the Renaissance, they called it magic, okay? So in Oration on the Dignity of Man, Pico di Mirandola, what is magic? Okay, he basically says magic is the highest realization of natural philosophy, i.e. science. And what's the ethics of magic? He writes about it at length. It is basically black magic versus white magic. The white magic serves nature, sedulously serves nature, protects the environment, is about overcoming human suffering and maladies. Francis Bacon, to bring forth a progeny of a spring of invention, i.e. technology, that may overcome to an extent and subdue our needs and our miseries. So essentially, there always was this kind of like ethics to do with technology, but always in the Renaissance, in these kind of hermetic texts like Asclepius and Corpus Mesicum, there was always an ethics to do with the environment. It was always to basically sedulously serve nature. That basically the world, nature, is a creation of God. By protecting nature and adding to it, you're aligning your will to the will of God. There was always this religious, ethical dimension to the environment and also to technology. And that's what needs to be revived for the 21st century. And then we can say, in the same way, there was this spiritual redemption idea. What's happening now is this idea of restoring the mysteries of Lucis for the 21st century. It's people like Sam Harris, but it's also people like your traditional psychedelic thinkers, but it's also Jordan Peterson even. So these kind of quite mainstream thinkers are actively calling for somehow reinstating these ancient mysteries for the 21st century. But it's not just about reinstating a kind of like, you know, kind of like entheogenic psychedelic use. It's really re-establishing the entire worldview which really accompanied these mysteries of Lucis. So what we think is the case is that basically this revolution for the 21st century necessarily has to be a replay of basically the same template that has occurred again and again in the past. And really because of the values are the essential values which lead people to join these revolutions in the first place. And these kind of values are the fundamental foundations of functioning societies and also of any utopia. Now, what went wrong with Nazism and Marxism, just to finish, okay, overrun slightly. Okay, essentially what happened was basically 19th century, there was this rise of atheism. What was lost in the mix was basically the theistic idea of the personal God within. That's what went missing, basically. So essentially the idea that basically the idea that God is inside us is really the foundations of human dignity. It's also the foundations of the sanctity of human life. Without it, you have basically utilitarianism. And what's wrong with utilitarianism? Well, okay, John Maynard Keynes, I think he was right in this. He basically called Marxism utilitarianism ad absurdum. Adam Curtis talks about the utilitarian stuckness of our time. What's wrong with it? It's basically, people are not a calculation. Basically, this idea of one for all and all for one, that, inalienable human rights is really the foundation of any fair functioning society. And it's not any calculation you can do on human lives, really. So these are really the kind of, I guess, in terms of a spiritual society, a kind of fair society, a functional society where people can actually fully kind of, become who they are, is really this idea of this theistic aspect, which was lost in Marxism and also in the evolution of the Nazi Party, is really the critical factor, which, basically prevents the kind of like some of the worst atrocities of what happened in the past. So I'm not saying it's easy. This kind of revolution I'm talking about is basically, okay, it's more work. But what I'm saying is, any successful revolution is not a kind of list of demands or a manifesto or new constitution or a new charismatic leader or a single issue movement or kind of new protest technique. Basically, yes, these things are important, but basically what makes all these things happen in terms of global system change is essentially the worldview which underlies it and underpins it. Now, okay, I said the word global system change because this template I've applied to the Renaissance, I can also apply to the history of China, the Yellow Emperor and these recurring revolutions in China, right up to Marxism and how we can correct Marxism. I can apply it to Islam. I can apply it to India, and also all the places where the hero with 1,000 faces has appeared, which is all over the world, according to Joseph Campbell. So anyway, so basically there is your key to basically this global mass identity that Yuval Noah Harari says needs to happen. But all we can say in terms of realizing it is that it's not impossible, but this is the means to do it. And it's not about a new identity. It's not like here's a new identity to join Muslims, Chinese people, Occidentals, etc. It's basically reinterpreting Islam, reinterpreting the Renaissance and Enlightenment, reinterpreting the history of China, reinterpreting Marxism, and even traditionalism and Nazism to a common truth. And that really is, I believe, the key to this. Okay, one, bringing people together to a common cause, but it's also a key to why this can lead to a global system change. Okay, I'll leave it there. Overran a little bit, I guess. Absolute skimming stone of a talk. So left out loads of details. I guess there's loads of questions, and I hope to fill in some of those details which might have Anyway, I'll leave it to the floor now. And
Awesome. Thanks for that, Wai. That was awesome.
Wow, that was intense, yeah.
We have
I got to win.
let's give Wai a round of applause. We got 40 minutes for Q&A. We have a bunch of questions in the chat already, so I'll tag in Luke. You can unmute yourself and ask Wai your question.
Yeah, hey, I really appreciate it. This is different from the lens that I typically look at things, so potentially a big reframe. But I guess my question is, with the exponentiality of things like exponential tech on the horizon, can the same mythos that we've been using be self-terminating and not something that we should look to continue to complete? And yeah, that's the question.
Yeah. This again, this is the thing. People think that exponential tech is some, dramatically new development that the kind of Renaissance geniuses could not have foretold. But really, one of the central ideas in the Renaissance was this idea of total knowledge and total power. Okay, so really, it's kind of like foretold, because one of the aims of in the New Atlantis, Francis Bacon's very influential book, and the House of Salomon, on which the Royal Society was based, the midwife of modern science, from which the modern scientific technological world has sprung, arguably, was influenced by Francis Bacon's Utopia. And what the key passage is, I can quote it. The key passage is: the end of our foundation, House of Salomon, on which the Royal Society is based, the end of our foundation is the knowledge of causes and the secret motions of things, and the enlarging of the bounds of human empire to the effecting of all things possible. So put another way, this idea of total knowledge and total power. In many of these kind of like Hermetic texts, it talks about exactly the same thing. So when we really talk about the singularity and this idea of exponential tech, it's kind of foretold in a sense. I mean, this idea of recursive, kind of improvement is just the more filling of the details of how total power and the effecting of all things possible is actually achieved. So the morality that basically went with this kind of like again, as a short talk, I cut out basically the morality was the tech was not to destroy and to harm and to maim. It was to basically heal and protect and to, cure disease. So really, instead of, Francis Bacon's quotes, to overcome to an extent and subdue our needs and our miseries, I mean, technology now creates miseries and creates unnecessary need. And of course, with the existing mythos and existing neoliberal agenda, it's going to be a disaster. The technological singularity, with this kind of like, if it's already kind of creating, this kind of malady already, then the beast, the demon, what William Blake called, this kind of like the dark satanic mills have become just something which is already at this stage destroying the planet, destroying the very roots and the basically foundations, the ecological environmental foundations which human life depends. We're looking at ecological environmental catastrophe on a global scale. If it happened in, Gobi Desert was lush pasture land, or the Sahara was lush pasture land, we're talking about the entire planet's going to be a desert. So even now, with the existing technologies and the existing mythos, it's a disaster. So what I say to you is basically something has to change. And if we can actually frame the new mythos with, put it in terms of these kind of like, these traditional texts that have this kind of gravitas, but it has this kind of like, a power of tradition. You know what I'm saying? You can say, like, this was the actual, like the roots of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment that were forgotten. If we can recover these teachings, the perennial wisdom for the 21st century, and then establish the metaphysical cosmological basis on which these ideas were based, then I think that's a very powerful basis for challenging the existing order, which is actually very, very powerful, and actually, it's going to take some doing. So I think this is what's needed to do it.
I appreciate that answer. That was thorough. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, compared to the last talk and the next talk, which is going to be quite scientific and technological, you really, the volume goes up, doesn't it? The kind of like the adrenaline level goes up, doesn't it? Really, you can really get hot and sweaty over these kind of things, really.
Awesome.
Your next question.
Oliver, you had a question.
Thank you. Yeah. Hey, Wai.
Hello, Blair. Great to see you.
So yeah, I kind of got two questions, which I'll just jam together with an extra bit. But yeah, so people so you're talking about communicating to, like, modern scientific society, but now, like, we're in, like, at least the emerging POMO society. So people are jaded, and they used to like dismissing like big claims like this, and knowledge and sort of like knowledge like this is often like hidden behind paywalls or locked into like subcultures, and the internet nurtures like a fragmented society. So how can this message cut across to a universal audience? Okay, it's the first part. And then, so like Daniel Schmachtenberger, talks about the attractor of the open digital society. That's the bit we've got to aim for, right? Not chaos, not authoritarianism, but this is like middle road. So how would you like situate that in that and brand this utopic, protopic vision? Like what's the logo? What's the headline? Like it's not a open digital society, but what is it? And ancillary to that is there a danger of like using that word utopia, because people tend to be like very, very wary of it these days?
Okay. The first question in terms of like getting the worldview out, obviously there's going to be a fight, Oliver. There's no way around it. Basically, you know, like let's go back to history. You got this thing called you know, divine right of kings to rule, and it's maintained by a very powerful tripod. It was maintained by, okay, the king has a right to rule, but the worldview was maintained by the church, and this thing called, you know, heaven or hell, and basically people kept in line. And you always had the aristocracy and the knights and the army. So basically, if you want to change a worldview, basically the existing worldview is going to fight back. Okay, the existing worldview will do everything it can to basically challenge you. This means universities. It means like it means basically the academic establishment. It means the kind of political establishment will basically challenge what you're doing. But because of this, your worldview needs to be right. It needs to be totally compelling. It needs to capture the zeitgeist. It needs to basically communicate to members of the establishment, or at least sons and daughters of the members of the establishment. So basically, it needs a kind of gravitas. It needs to be, you know, basically a vision that grips the masses, not just the, you know, working class or middle class or whatever. I'm talking about a vision that basically communicates to everyone. How it grips the masses is if this vision, this worldview, can actually communicate and address people's deepest yearnings, deepest desires, deepest fears, deepest anxieties. That's how it succeeds. The actual process of how a worldview spreads is through mouth-to-mouth canvassing. It is through people blogging. It's people giving speeches. But it's going to be a fight. There's no ways around it. It's a difficult process, because you're basically challenging all these existing competing worldviews. But you're also challenging, you will be competing inevitably with all these other worldviews that are bubbling up that suppose themselves to be the solution to what's going on. Okay, so this is one worldview, and I think it's basically has a kind of gravitas to it because it is basically founded on science and history and, you know, religion and spirituality. Now, I need nothing of Daniel Schmattenberger's work. Probably pronounced it wrong. Sorry, to Daniel. I shouldn't say his name again. Probably way off the mark. Anyway, I didn't know nothing about his work until I saw a Rebel Wisdom interview. So fairly recent interview of looking for the third attractor. Watch both parts. And what I'd say is we are aiming for the same thing. I think we should use words like utopia, and basically we should use words like, like a worldview, and you know, it's against the postmodern grain of things, and basically it is against many of the established ideas in academia. But I think exactly because of that, I think basically, you know, these ideas of no worldview. Okay, no ideas of utopia disempower people. And I think I'm not going to be a conspiracy theorist, but basically there are certain ideas in academia which are approved of because they are facilitating of existing power structures. If there are ideas which basically disempower any kind of successful revolution that might occur, like ideas of Weltanschauung, basically then they will be kind of suppressed. And if there's a kind of movements like postmodernism, which kind of opposed ideas of Weltanschauung, even utopia, then these ideas you might find have support more because of that in academia. So it's not going to be easy. I think you should use utopian thinking, and this idea of, you know, all utopian visions lead to failure is absolutely incorrect, because New Atlantis was a utopian vision, quite explicit technological utopian vision that gave rise to, you know, essentially the modern scientific technological world. I would also add that basically the utopian vision has to go hand in hand with the metaphysics of utopia, which really was this idea in the Oration on Dignity of Man, of this idea of the cosmic commonwealth, that magic was this thing that the Persian kings taught their sons so they could rule the human commonwealth on the pattern of the cosmic commonwealth. It is Plato's idea of the transcendent good. The philosopher king leaves the cave of illusions, experiences the transcendent good, but that has to go back to society to lead society towards the transcendent good. It's basically the idea of Mart, the transcendent pattern of order and justice in the universe. And it's, you know, it's the grand perfection in China, in Chinese Taoist philosophy. So what I think is basically the last talk also discussed this idea of destiny wave functions, and basically the idea of progress and meaning and teleologies woven into the universe. And it goes hand in hand with this idea that the teleological purpose is the inevitable realization and a manifesting of this transcendent archetype. The good will eventually manifest in society. And this is essentially what the prophecies are about. And I'm saying, okay, I'm saying it's to secular humanists and militant atheists and postmodernists, it sounds archaic. It sounds, you know, it sounds like a oldie worldy, but it's really, really powerful. And it has driven these revolutions. If you, through science, you can resurrect the metaphysics and the cosmology of teleology and of this transcendent, you know, pattern of the cosmic commonwealth and the inevitable progression of history to the you know, the manifesting of this perfection into the world, then you've essentially recovered something really important. Karl Marx, okay, basically he said that basically his work was the rational kernel within Hegel's mystical shell. Now, part of Hegel's mystical shell was his teleology, the kind of will towards this kind of absolute becoming realized in society. And, you know, okay, he's mistranslated slightly when people say Hegel said that this, the state is the manifestation of God. He says something slightly different, okay. But, okay, what it means is basically Karl Marx had to replace Hegel's teleology with dialectic materialism, okay, that never led to his kind of fifth state of his kind of next wave of communism from primitive communism. Now, not even hardcore Marxists today believe in scientific materialism or dialectic materialism. Basically, it just doesn't work anymore. No one believes in it. But if we recover this kind of like, you know, the teleology through the destiny wave function and this kind of big bounce idea, then essentially what you've done is you've basically resurrected through science Hegel's mystical shell. And I think it's really, really important, because then you basically resurrect one of the engines of these revolutionary movements. So I completely disagree when people say you shouldn't do utopian and prophetic and mythic thinking. Now, Daniel Schwarzenberger, what I'd say is that at the end of his talk, in his summary, he's saying basically, yes, we kind of map the kind of solution space, and we do our kind of like game theory thought experiments, and then we do this kind of like analysis, and then what I'd say, Daniel, is basically this: your third attractor isn't going to have much attraction. It's basically, you know, you do this kind of game theory analysis based on a theory which even John Nash himself has said, basically his assumptions on which his theory is based is, he said, he called it his enlightenment. He's basically said that humans are not, they don't really act rationally. So using a kind of like model, you know, kind of like a model of how humans are supposed to work, that even the originator of the model, John Nash, has said is incorrect, that doesn't even apply to two prisoners, you know, working together or against each other. And he's trying to apply that to analyzing world history involving millions and millions of human actors. Then I'd say basically, you're going to have a model of world history, and you're going to also have a model of the future, which I don't think corresponds to reality. And I think even ideas of game theory wins all the Nobel Prizes, because I think these theories of game theory applied to like, you know, modern economic thinking, I think it supports the neoliberal agenda personally. So I think, you know, the actual tools he's using, from what I've seen of a recent interview, is actually part of the problem. I don't think it's part of the solution. And I think any secular attempt to, you know, formulate some kind of, you know, third attractor, or some kind of a religion without religion, or some kind of like a, you know, utopia that isn't quite utopia, I don't think it's quite going to do it, quite frankly. So that's just my viewpoint. But obviously, people will disagree, and it's going to be a fight. It's going to be, you know, spread of a worldview. It's going to be difficult. Okay. Does it answer your question, Oliver?
Kind of. Just last bit. What's the headline then? What's the headline of this?
Oh,
vision?
Sorry, I've not gotten around to it. Really, I'm just an ideas man. You know, really, I just like a messenger. I'm not really like the propagandist. I think basically people just take my ideas and run. Basically, that's what I think. So I was going to say I didn't get it in the main part of the talk, but the next talk is about a huge idea where most of my time goes, is to this life intelligence symmetry theory, which I think is going to lead to true artificial intelligence. So that's where a lot of my time goes in terms of you know a world revolution. I tell you, like at this stage, really, that's where most of my time goes, and I basically give these political talks when people ask me. But in the back of my head, what I believe is that in long term, the life intelligence symmetry theory and the creation of true AI. So this is my eccentric belief. Okay, so join me for the next of these STOA meetings, because I'm going to convince you in the space of 45, 50 minutes that this new theory is correct. Okay, so this is, indulge me, okay, really. But I think that this theory and also the creation of true AI from it will give me a platform for then talking about these things on a far bigger scale. So when people like Daniel Schwarzenberger talk about, you know, like recursive AI and stuff, and other thinkers talk about the singularity and, you know, this kind of like the advent of AI, how it's going to change things. What if the worldview I'm talking about has contained in it the actual keys to the creation of true AI and the actual keys to instigating the technological singularity? So I think that is the combination of the most high-tech of most high-tech and most bleeding edge of science, this unified theory of life and neuroscience and functional genomics. And I think it's that binding of the religious, the utopian, the mythic, the prophetic, the mystical, with the technological and science in one mix. I think that's the killer combination that can really push this worldview into something, you know, into like a world movement. That's what I believe. So it doesn't have a name yet, Oliver. No.
Perhaps we can come up with one at the STOA sometime. Maybe
Yeah.
session.
Did you know Extinction Rebellion, who I really respect? I really respect Gail Bradbrook. I really like her as well. And you know, seriously, the hourglass is really good. I mean, it's really good. So I mean, say there are symbols out there which might continue, which might be, you know, kind of taken in by other social movements, or you know what I'm saying, or maybe amalgamations of social movements will just swap symbols around and swap names around. So I could easily see something like that happening, I believe.
Mm-hmm. All right. So thank you, Oliver. Teresa, you had a question.
Hi, Wei. Thank you so much for this.
Pleasure.
I am very sympathetic to your perspective. I've spent half my life in a spiritual community formerly known as religious science, and what you're saying sounds like a significant update to me.
All right. Okay.
But my question is, how do you see, or do you see this perspective as potentially making us better people than we were when we held the religious version of the same perspective? Or is it more about social change?
I mean, the existing religious perspective is exactly what needs replacing, and the also, you know, the existing secular humanist perspective, man as meat machine, man as collection of selfish genes, obviously that needs to be reworked. So really, the existing religious perspective, which was maintained by Catholic Church and Church of England, and also by religious fundamentalists, is part of the problem, really. So even though this is like a religious spiritual revolution in a sense, based on science, okay, it's going to be opposed by existing religion. It's going to be opposed not just by secular humanists and the powers that be, but I think the existing ideas of what is human, what is human's relationship to God, will be opposed by existing, you know, cults and existing mainstream religions. In terms of making us better, I think basically the idea and the explanation given in the last talk, you know, this great chain where you can see yourself as this tiny speck in the universe, but at the same time, you're also simultaneously at every point in your life, you're also simultaneously God. that is optional. That is the most verified, crazy, most controversial idea in the universe. So you don't put that at the forefront of your movement, basically. You'll say things like, yes, there is this cosmic image, you know, like the universe emanates from a point into a life, and then the universe emanates from a point, the Big Bang. So you kind of give this idea of, yes, there is this kind of like image of God, and you actually establish it using science. Then you frame the human being in a kind of like a kind of frame of cosmic purpose, that there really is a historic purpose. So you give these human beings meaning and purpose within this framework. Okay, so I think you can, in terms of a better, you know, interpretation of what is human, what is, obviously people are going to have different views, but what I think is this gives is really a kind of spectrum of belief, where basically if people want, they can go to that most verified of beliefs, you know, Pico de Mirandola, Oration on Dignity of Man. You know, you read reviews of the book Oration on Dignity of Man, or analyses by scholars, and they say it's a book about human potential. What it's book about, the book is really about people becoming God. That's what it's about. That's the fundamental manifesto of the Renaissance. Okay, you agree? You've read it, haven't you? You've read, and also obviously Corpus Mesicum. So you've got to have that kind of like spectrum of belief, but also the pyramid needs to go all the way. So, you know, Maslow's hierarchy, towards the end of his life, he's basically had this extra step on his hierarchy that was transcendence. So I think in terms of humanity, yes, you have Maslow's hierarchy and all these ideas of what it means to be human and what it means to be like happy and fulfilled. But unless you have this kind of transcendent dimension, then I think for a lot of people, it's going to be incomplete. So what I suggest is this gives a view of humanity, which it gives optional aspects, but really gives, I guess, a more complete and rounded view of things, which then also leads to, okay, this is a digression. What I believe, okay, this is the fourth talk in the series, is that you need to frame the path of expansion, which is what the Corpus Mesicum is talking about, and which is essentially Kabbalah and Tantra. Okay, it's essentially what it is. It's the same thing. You're basically going into the world. You're taking in a God identity. Going into, you basically got to fuse that with a political message of activism and this idea of trying to save the planet and actually bringing about the change. So if it's a worldview which talks about this kind of change in the world, he talks this new Bildung of this new education for the 21st century, but you have this situation on the planet right now, which is not a stable point. Camelot is in disarray. If you actually fuse those ideas together of a path of expansion that necessarily needs to expand into the world and be active in the world in order to partake of this dramatic change that needs to happen, then I think that's the real fusion which is right and correct for modern times. So I don't think, you know, Kabbalah, Tantra, or, you know, Corpus Mesicum in the 21st century is about going, you know, kind of like working on yourself and being a kind of like I think at different ages, God has to manifest in different ways. In times of stability, then it's time to be Avalokiteshvara, it's time to be, you know, this kind of aspect of God. But in terms of what's happening now, then it was almost that the universe calls us to partake of this process of essentially, and it sounds really highfalutin, of saving the planet and creating this better world. If you can fuse the two together, I think that's the killer combination. You got to do it right, obviously. You got to do it in a way that's convincing and actually, you know, kind of like, there's many dangers, obviously. You're kind of trying to unleash a kind of power which is very, very, very kind of like dangerous if not handled correctly. But at the same time, what's the alternative? Someone has to do it. And I believe if you can actually just, you know, just throw ideas out there, you know what I'm saying, then I think they'll take hold and flower into productive seeds and plants, hopefully. Does that answer your question?
Well, it does, except that I wasn't referring to the more recent consumer world-related religions, humanist religions. I was referring to the older incarnations of the perennial wisdom, and whether they were, in some sense, producing more effective people, more better people.
I think I'm going to make people unhappy by saying this, but I think there have been manifestations of the perennial wisdom which have been incorrect. I think you know, like Swedenborg, you know, even people like they came up with ideas, and basically I think there was a kind of I think, you know, people do their best they can. I mean, even like I'm gonna like you know, like displease lots of people, like you know, I mean, like I think basically there have been many people who have experienced non-duality and have come back into the world and they've basically interpreted their missions and their roles and basically their visions, etc., given what they knew at that time. I think at the end of the day, the real kind of manifesting of the perennial wisdom that can really make it, okay, that is sound, is that the manifestation that can stand on its own pure scientific, philosophic, mathematical foundations and its own reason, without any recourse to charismatic leadership or the scripture, that scripture says, or that book says. It has to have its own internal logic. Do you get it? And then relate itself to these ancient traditions. And I think that is what is absolutely needed. In terms of political talks, I mean, in the long version of this talk, I will talk about my belief in the separation between church and state. That sounds like a complete contradiction in terms, doesn't it? You're talking about using religion and mysticism in order to change society and influence the political world, but yet you're saying you believe in this separation between church and state. And it's not just John Locke and Thomas Jefferson. It is basically part of the Shia tradition in Islam. There's a reason for it. It's basically to stop people coming out with these kind of superstitious beliefs and having them influence politics. It stops people from saying, this is my unshakable belief and this is how society should be. It stops religious fanaticism influencing politics. So what I believe basically is that you need to communicate the political message and the spiritual message in purely rational philosophic terms. And you need to communicate the political message in a way that's completely rational. You see, you made a separation between politics, state, and religion. Do you see? Because there's a direct parallel. If there is a version of religion and spirituality that exists on its own without any recourse to prophetdom or charismatic influence, then I believe that is what is needed, but that can exist completely separate from the church and spirituality. But in fact, they're two sides of the same coin. So I think that's what needs to happen. So in terms of existing teachers and cult leaders and stuff, obviously, they get some of it right. But I think, even people like Andrew Cohen get some of it right. But I think in the overall grand scheme of things, I think a lot of the teaching has been kind of like has been mistaken. I don't want to mention names because it's going to alienate people. You've insulted my favorite guru, kind of thing, kind of.
Thanks, Derek. This might be the last question we can sneak in, but Lynn, you had a question.
Hey, I'm really inspired by this, and I think you're on the right track. And it reminds me of Donella Meadows. She talks about how there's different ways to change the system, and you can use prohibitions and rules and feedback loops and information, but the most powerful ones are the worldview or the paradigm and the power to transcend. And so very cool. But my question is around the consumer mythos. So I've been reading a book, or there's a book in my library I've been browsing again, which is Stuart Ewan, who is the Captains of Consciousness. And he talks about how there was in the 1920s, with the rise of the industry, a need to change the traditional, previous centuries conceptions of time and labor and artistry into sort of the industrial culture. And advertising grew up to really replace, notions of success, what is value, what is achievement, and that continues with us, that people see themselves as consumers, right? And it's really nailed down by the financial system and the economic system, and selling more, buying more. So your thoughts on how we can replace such a powerful and embedded narrative worldview. Thanks.
Completely. It's the kind of issue of the age, isn't it? It's this idea of negative freedom and positive freedom. Negative freedom is the kind of freedom from kind of coercion, but freedom from constraint. But then this idea of positive freedom is the freedom to do something. It involves utopian thinking, which is actually, many people say positive freedom is not necessarily leads to tyranny. which I don't think is the case. So, okay, this is just unpack this into quite a long answer, actually. So negative freedom, essentially, this is essentially the freedom to choose and consume, essentially. And if you're basically like growing up in this consumer society, then basically that your world is basically, you know, advertising, the kind of like existing in this kind of like consumerist a world of consuming, driving the capitalist system, which needs to chop down trees and, you know, exploit the world's resources. And then all these companies need to pay the borrowed money from interests and etc. The entrepreneurs, the venture capitalists need to be paid. And there's this kind of rapacious growth that's been going on for centuries now. And basically, it's also the end. This is like, this is it. This is the end of the rope. This is the end of the plank, isn't it? To use a kind of, so what I think is basically, yes, there is a good thing about negative freedom to have no kind of like constraints. I can do what I like within this consumer society. But I mean, Adam Curtis talks about this a lot, and I think he's right. It's this idea that once you basically reawaken these ideas of utopian vision, of basically that there is this inevitable progression towards, you know, this kind of end state, there is a purpose and meaning to the evolution of this planet, and also the evolution of world history, and also the evolution of the universe. It changes people's view of things, I think. And also, once you have this view of what freedom is for, in terms of, you know, equality, liberty, fraternity, the origins of this idea was not freedom in order to shop. It was really freedom to pursue your ultimate destiny. And as we, you know, back to Oration on Dignity of Man, the last question, it was freedom to become God. That's what it was. That's what it meant. And then the idea of utopian vision was the freedom to attempt utopia. Okay. So we're playing with ideas which, yes, are very dangerous. And, you know, some 20th century philosophers were right when they were saying that, you know, positive freedom can lead to tyranny. Basically, you know, who defines what utopia is? Who defines what is the good? Who defines what is the pattern of the cosmic commonwealth? Is it going to be a great leader, okay, or the committee, or even like the citizens' assembly? Is it going to define the future for all humanity? So what I think, yes, I mean, these ideas of utopia can be used and abused, and, you know, to very detrimental effects. We can quote all these, you know, studies of what happened with Nazism and communism, etc. But what I believe, it kind of misses the point, because it's not about utopia. It's really about it's not about, you know, this is utopia. Great leaders said it's going to be like this. The Citizens' Assembly or whatever says it's going to be like this. People need to be like this, work like this, wear this kind of clothing. What it is, it's a worldview. And basically, the utopian vision is part of the manifesting of the worldview. Do you see? It's like magic, abracadabra. As I say, so I create. You're not saying a specific formula for a specific pattern of organization in society. You're saying basically this is a worldview with all its values and all its kind of metaphysical, cosmological assumptions. And basically, it needs to basically take on board all these hopes, deepest yearnings of all humanity. What the worldview does, it articulates the will of the age. So the will of the age is basically all these yearnings you have in all the world. You flick on the news, what are these kind of common factors that keep coming? Obviously the environment and the ecosystem, but this is kind of clash of civilizations. There's these terrorist attacks, this kind of exploitation, this kind of wealth disparity, you know, poverty, etc. This is the will of the age. So in terms of creating utopia, it's not a specific image that great leader defines. It is basically a worldview that addresses all these deepest human yearnings, but also all the issues of the age. And the social movement is that which manifests the worldview in society. So it's not about a specific manifesto or a specific constitution or a specific list of demands. It is something far deeper. It is yeah, I mean, Darren, exactly. The zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, it basically captures the spirit of the age and it expresses the spirit of the age. And it grips the masses. This vision grips the masses because it basically tells the masses, the working classes, the middle classes, the Davos crowd, what they are feeling and thinking in their deepest recesses of their hearts. Do you see? So the utopian vision, that's what it is. That's the scope of it. So it's not a kind of Pol Pot thing or kind of Hitler thing or a kind of Marxist thing. It is something far grander and more dramatic than that. Does that answer your question? Okay, I'm not saying I've got this worldview, but you see what it is. It is not a specific list of demands. It is basically a set of metaphysical, cosmological assumptions on which you base your basic ethics and values and morality, on which you then construct your legal systems and your constitutions and your manifestos and your list of demands. So it's not about a charismatic leader who can get assassinated or a great leader who's going to go senile. It's really about a worldview, and it must include the revision of cosmological metaphysical assumptions. And the metaphysical assumptions which basically underpin this new worldview is exactly that of the Renaissance, and that behind essentially all world religion is basically the repeating pattern all through history. And that's the kind of gravitas this worldview needs to have. For this revolution to succeed, you need to get the establishment, you need to get the higher ups, the middle classes, the working classes on your side. And the only way to do that is a message of such gravity, such the weight of history behind it, but also science, reason, and philosophy married together. So I think that is what the utopian vision is, and that's what needs to be. That absolutely needs to be, and there's no other ways around it. It is not, oh, well, this is my third attractor based on my thought experiments and my kind of like deliberations and my kind of game theory analysis. It has to be something far bigger. Okay,
I love that.
Really,
that's very good.
Oh God, this is like a.
Well, let me just repeat something back to you because I loved it so much. Articulating the will of the age, right? Articulating the will of the age, and it's almost like that new story that fits the zeitgeist. And I do think that most people believe that it's not working anymore, and there's a readiness for it, right? So I'm very hopeful, and thank you so much for answering the question and more. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, no, it's bursting forwards. I mean, even like the billionaire class in some of their meetings have been warned, revolution is imminent. Even, people, it is happening basically. Look, I'll give you an interesting statistic. 42% of all the people on this planet are under the age 24. Okay, the statistics came out a few years ago. So we're talking 42% under the age under the age 24. And there's loads more young people. There's 2-3 billion more people coming on this planet. I can tell you with certainty, they're all going to be young people, and they're going to inherit this mess. They're going to inherit this desert, this malaise. Basically, what are they going to do? Yeah, just buckle down and work, young man, and basically pay off pensions and stuff, and just obey. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be civil strife, but it needs to be productive. It needs to lead someplace where society isn't torn apart, but leads us someplace better, where it's not just kind of like, the young ripping up the old. It basically has to be a kind of, antithesis, thesis, synthesis that somehow reconciles these revolutionary energies which are going to be there in these young people when they see fully what's happening with what's already there. So I think the revolution I'm talking about is not an extremist revolution. The revolution I'm talking is to restore moderation and balance to an extremist world, to restore balance to the force. So I think in terms of the scope of the message and who can get on board, it's a very powerful message. We're living in a world of not just, kind of religious extremists. We're living in like absolute selfishness as a virtue. Ayn Rand, that's a form of extremism. The market has the answers for everything. That's a form of free market extremism. So basically what I say is there's this timeless idea called a golden mean. It's universal. There's no time to go through it. All traditions, all religions basically have this idea of, restoring the balance to the mean, and that's where virtue lies. And I think the social movement, the sort of revolution I'm talking about, seeks to restore the balance to the mean in an extremist world.
Awesome.
Okay.
And that feels like a great place to close today's session. Another epic session, Wai. Round of applause.
Yeah, probably enjoyed it. Wow. I mean, probably enjoyed it. I mean, really a fantastic audience, really. I mean, it's like, seriously, in the future, I'll be giving the same talk in sweaty kind of like clubs and stuff. And I'll be dribbling in sweat like really, you really get passionate about these kind of ideas, can't you? You really can like, as you develop, I think you have to really basically express these ideas with passion to get them out there, really. And I think even like in front of a camera, I think if you can generate this kind of energy, I think social movements really come from public speaking. And I'm not saying I'm the public speaker who's going to do it, but I hope these ideas can actually inspire people to take the message out and blog and public speak and spread the message themselves, hopefully. Okay.
Your passion is definitely showing, and we love when people get sweaty at the Stoa. That's what we're about here, philosophically sweaty.
Fantastic, yeah, amazing.
So that next week, Wei will be back for part 3, and the part 3 is what's part 3, Wei? It's something about.
We're now for something completely different. Okay, so basically it's gonna, but it feeds into this talk, and it feeds into the first talk, because it's basically the means by which a worldview can really challenge existing worldviews. It's a huge idea. So indulge me. Okay, this guy has an eccentric belief. He believes he's sitting on one of the biggest scientific ideas of all time. Okay, and the idea is this. In the same way, there's a symmetry between life and energy and matter. Okay, E equals mc squared. It's basically interchangeable. They're two sides of the same coin. These two fundamental aspects of the universe, essentially one and the same, energy and matter, they basically interchange into one another. This new theory shows that basically the same is true for life and intelligence. So all these different aspects of life, genes, gene regulatory networks, genomes, kind of ontogenesis and the theory of evolution, there's a direct correspondence between all these aspects of intelligence, i.e. neurons, neuronal networks, brains, thought behavior and creativity, a perfect symmetry. And it's then extrapolates to the universe, and it's also the key to the creation of true AI and recursively self-modifying exponential technology. So it really kind of fits in with the last 2 talks. And also is the basis for the 4th talk, which explains exactly why these mystical spiritual experiences of oneness with God or non-duality happen. So they're all kind of quite major talks. Okay, so do join me, because it's going to be something completely different.
Yeah, and you can RSVP on the same link. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you'd like to join us live, feel the energy in the philosophical sweat here at the Stoa. Come join us. I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but Wei, thank you so much for coming to Stoa again. That was an awesome.
Oh, thank you. Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
And
really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it. Fantastic audience. Fantastic questions.
Yeah,
loved your questions.
The Stoa always brings it with the questions. And we have our other philosopher-in-residence, Jill Nephew, coming in. So if Wei is the shop, Jill is the chaser, and it's an interesting series on natural intelligence in practice. And today's going to be the dark and light side of inquiry, insight-based inquiry. So you can check that out. And we have Thumos hustles happening right now until 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. These are focused work cycles to get some good stuff done. And you can check out other sessions at stoa.ca. So that being said, Wei, everyone, thank you so much for coming to Stoa today.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, I'll get something to eat and drink now and have a little break.